If you've been feeling frustrated with the sharpness of your images, particularly when it comes to your action shots, then prick up your ears because today I'm going to be talking all about a focusing technique that might just have a big impact on the clarity and the sharpness of your photos. It's called back button focus, and today I'm going to dive into all the nitty-gritty details for you. What it is, when you might want to use it, what difference it might make to your photos, and how you can set that up on your camera if you want to give it a go. Hey there, I'm Audrey-Anne, founder of Live Snap Love, and I'm on a mission to help photographers just like you grow their photography skills quickly and in a way that feels simple and easy so you can shorten the learning curve and get photos you love faster. I created this Photography Made Simple podcast to share simple, actionable techniques, helpful insights, and practical advice on all things photography. So if you're itching to take your photos to the next level, whatever that level may be, you're in the perfect place. So let's get started. Back button focus is something that a lot of photographers use, and it's something that I have personally used for years. And I can tell you it was a major light bulb moment when I first learned about it, because it did make a difference to some of my images. Not all, but definitely some of them. So let's start by looking at exactly what back button focus is. So as standard, your camera is set up to find focus whenever the shutter button is half depressed. Then, once focused is achieved, and you'll usually get some kind of confirmation about that, whether that be a green light or a beep, you then push the shutter all the way down to take the picture. With back button focusing, you actually set your camera up in a different way so that the shutter button doesn't handle the focus anymore. Instead, you assign a button on the back of your camera to do it. You'll still press the shutter to take the picture as before, but you'll no longer use the shutter button to find focus. Essentially, you have split those two functions. Instead of them all being under the control of the shutter button, you've taken the focus function away and assigned that to a button on the back of your camera instead. So to use this, you're holding your camera, you have your thumb on one of the buttons on the back of your camera and your finger on the shutter button. And when you are going to take a shot, you're going to press the button on the back of the camera to find focus and then press the shutter button to actually take the picture. And I wish you could see me at the moment because I'm actually holding up an imaginary camera and pressing my thumb and my shutter button in mid-air. Anyway, so right now you might be wondering, why would you even want to change the focus function from the shutter to the button on the back of your camera? What difference will that actually make to your photos? Well, this is why we do it. We want to separate the function of the focus from the shutter button so that we can continually focus instead of having to have one button perform two functions. So when you have a subject who is moving about, you could keep your finger on the back button so that the camera is continually focusing, and then you use the shutter to snap and get the picture. As both actions are actually happening together simultaneously, instead of having that small delay between half depressing the shutter to find focus and then snapping the picture, in theory at least, you are more likely to get a crisp, sharp, in-focus picture. So let me give you an example of this in action. Let's say you have your child running towards you and you're taking a series of pictures as they get closer toward you. When you're using the focus function on your shutter, you are first half depressing the shutter button, finding focus, and then snapping the shutter. But in that little half a second delay between you finding focus and pressing the shutter, they could have already moved out of the area that you focused on, and that can lead to a slightly soft image. But with back button focusing, your thumb is on the button on the back of that camera and it's holding it down so it can continually maintain focus as you then press the shutter. Now, whether or not this will make any real difference to your photos really depends on what you are actually photographing and what your subject is doing. So if you mainly shoot still life or landscapes or portraits of people in pose situations where they're not moving around a lot, I'll be honest, back button focus is not going to rock your world. You're not going to notice that much difference. You have to remember that back button focus doesn't actually change the focusing system of the camera. It just changes what button it's been assigned to. So in those situations where you don't have the subject moving around, it's really not going to make that much difference for you. However, if you shoot action or sports photography, then I think it's definitely going to make a difference for you. So when I say action or sports photography, that could be anything from cars going around a racetrack, a group of cyclists coming towards you, your child on sports day, a football game, or it could just even be your toddler running around quite erratically in the back garden. Anywhere where there is movement and action in the frame, definitely back button focus can be a real game changer. So that's the main type of photos that you'll actually see a difference when you use back button focusing. Now, there is another time when it can be really useful, and that is when you're taking a self-portrait. Because another feature of back button focus is that it actually locks your focus in place. So if you press your thumb onto your back button and then release it, your focus won't actually change until you press that button again. Now, this can be really useful for self-portraits because you don't want the focus to change in between shots. And your camera is pressing the shutter for you remotely, and it can be really easy to actually lose focus. So again, let me just give you another example of that in action. Let's say you were photographing you and your child on the couch in your living room. So for this, I would have my child sit there first on the couch. I would use my back button to set focus on him. And then I would be using my remote trigger or my timer or whatever it is that you use. And I would go and get in the frame and I would use that to press the shutter remotely. So with back button focus, my focus is not going to change from where I first set it because I've used the back button. That's locking the focus in place. And then the shutter button doesn't have anything to do with focus anymore, so it can't knock it off when it goes. So that's just another time and another place that you might find back button focus useful. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I have to say that you might not like back button focusing. It is not for everyone. Some have tried it and swear it doesn't make the blindest bit of difference to their photos, and they go right back to using the shutter button for their focus. Other people absolutely love it, swear it makes a huge difference in their images, and they stick to using it. I'm kind of in the middle of those two camps. I do think it makes a difference to my action shots, but for me, it's not the be all and end all. I can actually still get sharp photos even if I had my focus assigned to my shutter buttons. So I think it's useful, but maybe not the be all and end all. One tip I will give you though is to stick with it for a little while before deciding whether this is something you want to use or not. And that's because it takes a little while for your muscle memory to kick in so that your thumb is going to that back button every time you want to set the focus. That's because it takes a little while for your muscle memory to kick in so that your thumb is going to that back button every time you want to set the focus. For years, probably all of our lives actually, we've been using cameras where we've have to press the shutter to find the focus and then press it fully to take the picture. And it does take a little while to be able to move away from that and do it with confidence. So try it for a little bit, see if you like it, and if you do, great, carry on using it. Now, one thing I really want to emphasize though is that back button focus in and of itself will not improve the sharpness or the clarity of your images. It's just one small element that can help getting sharp focus in your images. We actually have a whole module on focus in our Auto to Awesome program because it is such a huge subject. So consider it just one small tool in your overall quest for sharp photos. So now you've got all the information on back button focusing. We know what it is. We know that we are assigning that button to the back of our camera to handle focus instead of the shutter. We know why we're doing it so that we can separate the two functions of taking the picture and finding focus. And we know that it's most useful for action or sports photography and possibly for self-portraits as well. If you're now keen to give it a go after having all that information, this is what you need to do. So to set up back button focus, go into your camera's custom functions and you want to change the function of the shutter button. Now, I can't tell you exactly where that's going to be because it's going to vary between Canon and Nikon and Sony and Panasonic. And even under those manufacturers, it's going to vary from model to model. So you are going to need to dig out your camera manual if you're unsure. Essentially, though, you're going into something called custom functions or custom settings, something that has that word, usually custom, in there. And then you're going to find the shutter button and you're going to change its function. Now, it will say something like metering and AF start. You are going to change that to metering start only, essentially taking away that autofocus function from your shutter button. Again, those terms might be slightly different. It might not say AF start. It might not say metering start only. It might say something slightly different, but you'll get the idea. You're taking the focus function away from the shutter button. The next step is to then assign a button on the back of your camera to act as your focus button. Now, this will probably be your AF on button. If you don't have that, you can use the star button instead. Once you've chosen which one of those it's going to be, go back into that custom settings again, find the one for that button, and then you're going to change it so that that button says AF start. So we've taken AF start away from the shutter button and we've moved it to that button at the back of our camera. Now, I know all of that might seem a little bit confusing and difficult to remember. So if you go to livesnaplove.com/3, that way you can see the show notes for this episode. And I have written out the instructions and I have added in a couple of pictures as well, so you can see that in action. So that's livesnaplove.com/3, and you'll also find links to further resources and just things that I think you will like there as well. So once you have made that change to your settings in your camera, then you are free to go and play and practice to your heart's content. Now, as I said before, do give this a couple of days of practicing before you decide whether this is for you or not. It is going to take time to build in that muscle memory of using your thumb on that button on the back of your camera to activate focus. So give it a little while before you decide whether it's for you or not. So that's it for this week's episode. I hope you got a lot out of it. You learned something new about your camera and that you're going to go away and at least try back button focusing. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you again same time, same place next week. So that wraps up this week's episode of Photography Made Simple. I'll be back at the same time, same place next week. But if you want more, head on over to livesnaplove.com/podcast, where you can find all the resources and the downloads mentioned, plus a whole lot more. Finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, please be sure to subscribe, and that way you won't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you again next week.